Summer, I went to visit my parents in New Jersey. And as we often do, we wound up watching movies late into the night. My parents love movies. They have stacks of DVDs. And as we were going through the stacks of DVDs, picking out contenders for the next movie, my mom said, "Have you seen The Sum of All Fears?" I said, "No, I've never seen it," and she couldn't believe it, and she dropped the other DVDs, and this one went straight to the top of the docket. So we watched it, and just so you know, there are going to be spoilers in this sermon very soon, but you've had 18 years. 30 if you count the novel, so that's on you. It was based on a Tom Clancy novel. How many of you are familiar with The Sum of All Fears? Oh, not that, maybe about 20%. Okay, well, the rest of you are in for a surprise. Y'all aren't. So the movie has Ben Affleck, a young Ben Affleck, Morgan Freeman, who's never aged at all, and James Cromwell. That's the farmer from the movie Babe? Yes, playing the President of the United States, which was depressingly poignant for me. You know, just given the current situation, I would love the farmer from Babe to be president. That'll do, Mr. President. That'll do. Anyway, the plot is, far-fetched as it is, that an Austrian billionaire, yes, a very sinister-looking figure, wants to start World War III between Russia and the United States, and his plan is to sneak a nuclear weapon into the US, detonate it, and then blame Russia, right? And then the US will retaliate unless Ben Affleck can stop them. And in 2019, we know that it's actually much easier to just go through Facebook, right? But I digress. And at what I thought was the climax of the movie, the bomb has made it to the US. And it's in a football stadium in Baltimore, where the president and Morgan Freeman are watching the game. Oh no. And Ben Affleck is racing in a helicopter to warn them in time so they can save everyone as usual. And then the bomb goes off. And I have never been so surprised by a movie, not even Fight Club. It's true. It went off. Like there was a mushroom cloud, the stadium's gone, and I was so surprised. I turned to my parents and said, "That didn't really happen. This is a dream, right? This is the dream sequence. Ben Affleck's dreaming. The bomb didn't go off." And in turn, they were surprised. They said, "No, it did. Baltimore's gone." I was so surprised. I cannot put into words how caught off guard and unsettled I was. Not just the enormity of it, but because I truly did not see this plot twist coming. Even though the plot all along had said this was the point, this was coming. A major plot point of the movie is that a bomb just obliterates Baltimore. And I could not have been more stunned if it had happened in the middle of the Lego movie. So, in interrogating inside myself my own reaction, I came to realize that since September 11th, 2001, the bad thing almost never happens in movies anymore. For the past 18 years in cinema, the hero has almost always gotten there in time. I was 18 when the planes hit. And so for half my life, and for the entire span of my adult life so far, Ben Affleck has always won, so to speak. Movies have always been mostly hopeful. You know, you expect there to be the scene where it looks like everything is lost and there's no way, it's completely impossible, but 9 times out of 10, someone saves the day. Someone saves the day. They even picked up Matt Damon, Ben Affleck's friend, at the end of The Martian, and that really seemed impossible. But for 18 years, we've been asking Hollywood for hope. Now, the sum of all fears, which surprised me so much, even though it was in the title, right? It had wrapped up its filming 3 months before the attacks on September 11th. In that last sliver of time, when it was still thrilling to spend 2 hours imagining what it would be like if the worst thing that could happen happened, if the sum of all our fears came true. Well, it's not fun anymore. It hasn't been for almost 20 years. And the fact that everyone else in the movie could just carry on like, well, it was regrettable that Baltimore was gone, but at least Ben Affleck lived, that would never make it to the screen today. It would never make it out of the studio. Because post 9/11, we all know better. We know what can happen. And instead, our collective longing for reassurance that miracles can happen, that things can be okay, that Ben Affleck can get there in time sometimes, that's come to the surface in our art and cinema. Since watching the movie, I've become intrigued about the role of hope in human life and culture, both communally and as individuals, how it's useful, whether it's useful, because sometimes bad things do still happen, even when we're hopeful. You know, hope can have a sad dimension. When we hold out hope for something that's not ever going to happen, children do this really well. They often have hopes like that because they can't help themselves and because we let them, because to do otherwise would be cruel. But we as adults do it too, perhaps you have, in situations when we become children again, in situations of hopelessness, hoping that a partner will change after all these years and become less cruel, that an elderly parent will get better, they'll really turn a corner this time, or that we'll stay clean this time. This time is different. And I would say that far from being misplaced or foolish, in those times, hope is one of the only things that keeps us alive. As a chaplain, I was asked at least once a week to pray for a miracle. And you can imagine how alarming this was to me, an atheist-leaning Unitarian Universalist, a believer in science, a full proponent of double-blind, peer-reviewed studies, not miracles, and a person who is going to get a flu shot now that it's September, hint, hint, because there were no miracles in my world, only pathogens and preventions. The first time I was asked, I let the patient's family lead the prayer. Would you like to start? I said, which was a cop-out. And then I went straight to my mentor, the chaplain Dow, and said, what do I do? Our worship theme for the month of January, looking ahead, is going to be integrity, and we'll go over that then. But suffice it to say, I didn't feel that I would be able to sleep at night if I pretended in front of suffering people that a miracle was possible, when the patient's chart said that it wasn't. What do? I asked, when someone asks me to pray for a miracle and I don't believe in miracles? And Chaplain Dow looked me in the eye and said, you pray for a miracle. He used to tell me that we hold all of our fears in one hand, our fears about the worst thing that can happen, the worst and disheartening parts of reality, the reality of the situation. We hold that in one hand. And in our other hand, we hold hope. Because without the handful of reality, we just become delusional. But without the handful of hope, we succumb to despair. And you can hold both at the same time. The thing about prayer that I didn't understand is that it's not often that people get to admit out loud to themselves what it is they really want. To say out loud, God, please, I want the impossible. I'm asking you now. The first time I saw a miracle was at the hospital. A patient with a severe brain injury, whose eyes had been rolling back in their head for weeks, whose movements were sporadic and never purposeful, turned, and for a brief moment as I walked by their room, made eye contact with me. I felt a chill. It was unmistakable. I was so shaken I had to go sit down, and it turned out that despite their drastic brain injury, they were starting to show signs of improvement. And this is a 1 in 10,000 patient. 1 in 10,000. I would never want another family to believe wholeheartedly that that would be the outcome. But I wouldn't want to take away their hope. After that, I no longer felt bad about praying for miracles. The thing about miracles is that they're incredibly rare, almost impossible, and we have a word for them because they happen. Is it so wrong to hope that the Ben Affleck character comes up with something? Is it wrong to want that? I don't think so. Of course, by the other token, pretending that everything is going to be fine all the time, no matter what, can be disturbing and annoying to everyone around us. It's so annoying that Viktor Frankl wrote in his memoir about life in the concentration camps in World War II. He wrote that while many men lost hope completely, and it was depressing, he wrote, quote, "It was the incorrigible optimists who were the worst companions." No one wanted to share a bunk with the guy who was like, "Oh no, this is all fine." It's not fine. Find a different bunk. And yet, he wrote, quote, "The religious interest of the prisoners, the religious interest, as far and as soon as it developed, was the most sincere imaginable." He writes, "The depth and vigor of religious belief often surprised and moved a new arrival to the camps. Most impressive," he says in this connection, "were the improvised prayers or services, the margarine with a thread pulled from your pants, lit as a lamp." He says that took place in the corner of a hut or in the darkness of the locked cattle truck in which we were being brought back from a distant work site, tired, hungry, and frozen in our ragged clothing. Isn't every coming to church or synagogue an act of hope? And isn't that hope something deeper and more real than relentless optimism? We don't have to pretend that everything's going to work out fine to come to church, to say out loud in front of others, "God, please, I want the impossible." It's crucial to our emotional well-being to look forward with expectation to some kind of outcome, to be invested in some emotional way in things turning out well, or if not well, God, please, not so bad. Cultivating hope in ourselves is a way of engaging with our own vulnerabilities, our own desires as finite, fallible creatures. And thus it's central to religion. We are mortal and we are hoping creatures. Today, after the service, we're doing a whole community art project, dyeing long bolts of fabric to decorate the sanctuary for next week's water communion. Our engagement in these kinds of rituals for things in the future, even if it's just a week away, is a kind of hope that we'll be here just a little bit longer. And please don't take that for granted. It's our hope for the community and our hope in what we believe, even as we dye it into our very fabric. Last week, I mentioned that there are a good number of Unitarian Universalists now throughout the country who are upset, increasingly vocally upset, that our denomination has become focused on anti-racism, both in the world and in our own churches. And these people deny Unitarians could ever be racist. We mean so well. Yeah, who think that all this emphasis on disability rights and trans rights, it can't be necessary. There was never a problem before. And for me, this has been disheartening. It's taken a little chip of my hope every time I read one of these comments. And on the one hand, I see and I appreciate their hope. The hope that it isn't true. We wouldn't really be like that. Our faith movement can't have problems. We can't have problems. It must be so disheartening to hear your religion, something you hold so dear and close to your heart, something that might have saved your life, criticized from within. Did we lose my clip mic? How about the pulpit mic? Let's try this. Satan won't win today. Not with this AV team. Thank you, guys. So I see the hope that our religion must be better than all of that, all that pettiness. And I understand how disheartening it must be to see those fractures revealed when it might seem like they could have just been left alone and things could have been fine. But they weren't fine, were they? And at the same time, I have a parallel hope that we can make this religion more inclusive and accessible, that we can live up to our highest ideals, that we Unitarian Universalists can become a true beloved community if we're honest with ourselves about the ways we sometimes get it wrong like humans do. And I don't think it'll take a miracle. I think it'll take work. And we can do that. One of the things that gives me the most hope is other humans and their ability to get stuff done. And their ability to most of the time do the right thing. Or at least come around. I try not to be too discouraged when someone does the wrong thing, chooses for selfish or malicious reasons, because tomorrow they could change their mind. I've come around sometimes too. I hope they will. And when I'm feeling tired in my soul, as sometimes all of us are, there are always other people I can look to for renewed hope, to have that flame inside of myself rekindled by another. The thing about real life, unlike the movies, is that there's not just one Ben Affleck. There are so many. This Friday begins the week-long global climate strike, organized by youth. On the one hand, we can admit out loud now that human activity on this earth has changed the climate forever in ways that will be disastrous and will cause suffering. And it's disheartening, I think, to many of us, how powerless ordinary people are in the face of inaction by the rich and the powerful, corporations and governments. And on the other hand, the hand in which we hold our hope, vast numbers of people, mostly young people, are rising up to demand change. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. There are elders in this church who have been fighting for climate action for 40 years or longer. Not only has your work not been in vain, these youths who are rising up around the world, whether they're in Sweden or India, Bangladesh or France, these are your grandchildren. They're yours, and they give me hope. Where do you find hope? I encourage you to look around this week after you leave this place and notice where you find it, where you've always found it, what you can draw on for inspiration, for your own resilience. The resilience of nature gives me hope. Every time I see a tiny plant sprouting up from a crack in the sidewalk, I feel a surge of hope in my heart, just for the sheer persistence of life. Beauty gives me hope. The ability of humans to take something broken and make something beautiful out of it, to take their heartbreak and sing the blues. When things feel meaningless and empty, the fact that we are the universe observing itself gives me hope and inspiration, that we are wonderfully and fearfully made, even when the car breaks down, even when we're out of milk, even when the line at the DMV is long or the planet is on fire. And I find hope whenever I see mercy. Mercy slays me. Whenever humans seem determined to do the wrong thing, whenever they seem vicious or calculating or predatory, remember always, mercy was a human invention. In World War II, when Raoul Wallenberg was smuggling Jews out of Hungary with forged passports, and he heard, ahead of time, 2 weeks ahead of time, that he would be arrested and executed. When he was given by his informants a chance to escape, he chose to stay and save more people. And one of the last things he said to his friends was, if he left and lived, how would he live with himself? Thinking of those 2 weeks' worth of lives he would have saved. Mercy. The men who walked into Chernobyl or the reactor at Fukushima to stop the bleeding and save others. Mercy. Or people leaving jugs of water in the desert for immigrants. Or the burrito brigade handing out food in Eugene. The lawyers and judges holding our justice system together as best they can in the face of tyranny. God, I want the impossible. And it comes in the form of human mercy. Every time I see someone do the right thing, in basically any situation, it gives me hope. And to see millions of people trying to do the right thing this week gives me a lot of hope. In a time when we've been asking God for the impossible. That doesn't mean I think all the evils of the world can be contained or undone. I'm reminded of the story of Pandora's box from Greek mythology. Prometheus, the human, stole fire from the gods, from Zeus in particular, much in the way that we pulled oil out of the ground and industrialized the planet for our own human uses, not knowing at first what we were doing. And in return, Zeus created all the evils of the world and gave them to the humans, wrapped as a gift. I think of the shiny plastics that we've consumed, the jet fuel we've burned and ecosystems destroyed in the name of progress. It looks like a gift sometimes. But once that box was opened, it unleashed so many spirits, vengeful spirits that began to hunt down humans. Disease and sickness, greed, hatred, sorrow, revenge, anger, and despair, that thing that we would succumb to. But the part of the myth that often gets forgotten is that when all the evils had flown away from the container, out of the control of humans, where we could never within our power fully put them back, one spirit remained behind, waiting instead to be picked up. At the bottom of the container, where nothing else was left, was hope.